Hello, I'm Michael Francis, Music Director of the Florida Orchestra, and I'm very sorry that we're not bringing you live concerts at the moment. However, we at the Florida Orchestra believe in keeping the music coming, and we want to make sure that you get to hear as much during this time of separation and isolation. So on Thursday evening will be the first of our WSMR broadcasts, and where we normally do pre-concert talks for all of our masterworks concerts, I thought I will give you a shortened version to remind you of what a spectacular evening it was and to give you some context to some of the pieces. Because it's not often that you have a concert with Gershwin, Grieg, Beethoven, Mason Bates and Ravel in one place. Rather eclectic. But then again, so is Tampa Bay. And this was my attempt at a loose homage to the cultural riches and beauty of Tampa Bay in musical form, sort of an inspiration from Tampa Bay. So where better to start than with our wonderful Cuban heritage? Back in 1885 there were 1,000 Cubans here in Tampa Bay, but by 1900 there were 16,000. And of course in Ybor City, what a marvelous addition they have been with their culture, music, food, industry, and just the way that they've really enriched our culture in such a fantastic way. So I thought Gershwin, the most American of composers, he spent 2 rather hedonistic weeks in which he didn't sleep in Havana in 1932 and was so inspired by the various rhythms that he came back and wrote the Cuban overture, originally called rumba. In fact, he actually brought back 4 instruments with him, the claves, the guiro, the congos and the maracas. And in his instruction for the performance, he asked that the musicians will sit just in front of the conductor, which is actually, we did that, and it made a real difference, and John Shaw and his team found it much easier for all of us to be united with this wonderful rhythm. The world premiere of this was in front of 18,000 people. Can you imagine that? Beethoven would have bitten your hand off to have a chance to perform to that many people. Really an exciting affair. Now, thinking about Gershwin was, he did die very young. He was only 38, which is a real tragedy because he was one of the great American artistic voices. Many great books if you want to read about it during this time of separation. Summertime, which is by Richard Crawford, George Gershwin's Life in Music. I highly recommend that. Our second piece features a Cuban pianist, Aldo Lopez Gavilon, who's already become a firm favorite here in Tampa Bay. His first performance of Rachmaninoff's Rhapsody on the theme of Paganini was wonderfully received, but then he brought the house down last season with his performance of Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. A consummate jazz pianist and a fantastic classical musician as well. So Grieg's Piano Concerto, I wanted to give this into the program to offer an example of the European migration into Florida. And Grieg was a fascinating man. He wrote this when he was 25, and it was pretty much the last major piece he would write. It was in 1868. After this, he spent most of his time writing miniatures and small, delicate pieces for solo piano or chamber ensemble. But yet it's a real shame because you can hear so much of this beautiful melodic writing. The opening so influenced by Robert Schumann's Piano Concerto. Actually, it's quite fun sometimes to put on the Robert Schumann Piano Concerto, then the Grieg, and to tell which one's which. And I think it's been a pianist's great game, is as you start with one piece and then I'll deliberately play the wrong one in the rehearsal. Incidentally, if you want some fun, I do recommend looking up Morecambe and Wise, Morecambe and Wise. Their skit, they're British comedians with Andre Previn, based on the Grieg Piano Concerto with the London Symphony Orchestra, is an absolute classic, will have you delighted. In fact, we called him Andrew Preview ever since then. I can't even get his name right now. Andre Previn sadly died last year. A brilliant all-round American musician, composer, performer, everything. But so that piece, to me, represents Grieg's almost promise of what he could have done if he continued in the symphonic form or concerto form with that glorious melodic writing, marvelous orchestration. Franz Liszt thought it was a piece of genius. And at the very end of it, there's a moment which he does the final climax, and he does a G natural instead of a G sharp, and he shouted out, "G natural, what a stroke of genius." So what you can do now is at the end of the performance, turn around to your friends and say, "Oh, that G natural is spectacular." They'll be completely convinced that you're a genius yourself. Into the second half, we went into Beethoven. Beethoven's Leonore Overture No. 3, written in 1805. Beethoven, of course, revolutionized music. His symphonies, his concertos, he basically started the whole romantic movement on his own. When he was a young man, he was referred to as Mozart. When he was an older man, he was referred to as Shakespeare. He was just a total genius. And of course, this year, 2020, is his 250th anniversary, and we've dedicated this season and next season to celebrating all of his major works. In this one, it goes to show that despite his brilliance in symphonies, he didn't do so well in opera. And he tried so many different attempts at the overture for Fidelio. Now, loosely, the story of Fidelio is as follows. Leonore is a young woman who's married to Florestan. Florestan is a political prisoner held down in the deepest, darkest dungeon by Don Bizarro, an evil governor who wants to destroy him as a political enemy. So Leonore dresses up as Fidelio, a young man, to try and break into the prison and free Florestan. There's all sorts of complications with the young jailer's daughter falling in love with Fidelio. It always happens in opera, as you know. And then at the end of it, you'll hear the sound of the trumpet, which is the arrival of the governor, Don Fernando, who frees not only Florestan, but all of the prisoners. It's really an example of humanity being united, being freed, something really uplifting and glorious. And I wanted to show that actually for some composers, geographical limitations don't count. Beethoven is the world's composer, and as relevant to us in Florida as he is in Bonn, Germany, or in Tokyo, Japan, or wherever. He's just the universal composer for good reason. This 15-minute concerto, 15-minute overture it didn't work as an overture because the problem was it told the entire story in 15 minutes. You didn't need to listen to the extra 2 hours. And if you know that story and listen through, you'll really notice that actually everything is complete and perfect. A fantastic, brilliant, exhilarating piece of music which was marvelously performed by the Florida Orchestra on this evening. After this, I wanted to show something about how Tampa Bay is a melting pot of various cultures, and to include something by a living composer. So Mason Bates. Mason Bates is not only a brilliant classical composer who's been featured with the Chicago Symphony, San Francisco Symphony, and now at the Kennedy Center this year, but also a DJ. And what's unique about his music is the way that he incorporates techno into it. So the structure of this piece is what we call a double scherzo. So you have sort of the theme, and then we have 4 separate solos, which were meant to be improvised by any form of instrument, and always going back to the same techno, as if each culture docks onto this great mothership. The first solo will be by John Shaw on percussion, then Erica Schrauger on E-flat clarinet, on trombone Joel Vase, and finishing with Rob Smith on trumpet. This really brought the house down. A very interesting example of how classical music can reflect so much and such variety in a brilliant piece of music. And we finish with Ravel's Bolero. This piece of music, it sort of feels like it's showing off, because it really just has 2 themes, doesn't change key until the very, very end, and just an example of Ravel, our French composer, showing what he can do. The way to listen to it is, apart from the snare drum rhythm, which goes all the way through, bravo John Shaw, he had a big evening this concert. It effectively is in 4 major loops. The first theme on flute, the first theme on flute, then it's repeated on clarinet, then it's on bassoon, then on E-flat clarinet, the second one, which is more sultry and a little more raunchy. That entire thing is then repeated 4 times, and at the end we have the big finale, each time adding more and more instruments. A total work of art, and an amazing example, of course, for us to see the Spanish influence into Florida. Incidentally, there's another Michael Francis in Florida. He's written a book and is an expert on the Spanish arrival in Florida in 1513 with Juan Ponce de Leon. And so if you look him up, J. Michael Francis, and he teaches at USF St. Pete, you can find all sorts of things about him as well. I'm sorry that we're not performing the concerts, but I do hope you enjoy this one. And if those who were there will be reminded of what a glorious evening. And of course, the end of the Bolero, it nearly brought the house down, and quite rightly so. Thank you very much. Enjoy the concert.